The 2023 NHL Draft is in the books. Toronto adding 3 prospects to the pipeline. Will break down each and every selection. And Brad Treliving starting to get some clarity as to who he might be targeting in free agency. All that and more coming up on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, same with the vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit, ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items apply. Exclusions apply. What's going on, Dave? The draft officially in the books. Toronto making 3 selections. They didn't move up the draft board, down the draft board. They stuck and they pick at every single selection. How you feeling about overall how the Leafs draft turned out this year?
Well, after I took my nap watching the draft, I thought the Leafs, with 3 picks, I didn't have big expectations for them to be able to really do much in this draft. The draft itself didn't really have much going for it, right? Like, there are a few picks moved around, but like nothing substantial. I don't know what GMs are kind of waiting for here. Like, there are times where we always hear about there's a lot going to happen at the draft and then it's crickets. But considering how many teams have players that are likely going to be available heading into July 1st, I was a little surprised that we didn't hear a lot of news, not even a lot of chatter about anything being closed. So if you're working myself especially working as someone who covers deals and real-time news, usually the night before free agency is when things kind of get a little silly. So if you don't see anything by draft time, that's usually when teams, especially players who have no trade clause, signing bonuses, that's generally when you start to see some of that movement. So hopefully we do, because it's been real hard to find anything exciting to really talk about in terms of moves and transactions.
Yeah, Brad Treliving spoke in his presser earlier today, and he was kind of asked why he felt that there wasn't as much movement on the draft floor as there typically is. And the reason he gave was that he felt a lot of teams had different draft boards, and guys really liked certain players at certain spots, and there wasn't a whole lot of pick movement. Keep in mind, 0 trades in the first round. It was the first time since 2007 where that occurred. There wasn't a whole lot of trading also that happened on day 2. Not a whole lot of players that got dealt as well. Sometimes we'll see some guys go, on day 2 is typically when we'll see some of the mid-level trades. There were a couple guys who ended up getting dealt and whatnot. Corey Perry finds himself in Chicago. He signed a 4-year deal as well. Like that one for, a day 2 draft pick and, a couple other deals as well. But overall, I think from a Toronto perspective, there wasn't a whole lot that they could do with the 3 picks that they had. They had that first round pick, 28th overall, in which they took Easton Cowan from the London Knights. And then they had to wait all the way to pick 153 in the 5th round, in which they took Hudson Malinowski, center from the AJHL's Brooks Bandits. And then in the 6th round, they got a defenseman in Noah Chadwick of the Lethbridge Hurricanes. So why don't we kind of break these guys down one by one, Dave, and kind of go over what what all 3 of these guys, I suppose, might be able to bring to the prospect pipeline. So why don't we start, obviously, really quickly, we can go over Easton Cowan. For those who missed, we did a show yesterday, obviously. We do daily podcasts here on Locked On Leafs, and we went into, we talked about Easton Cowan already yesterday. We went into quite, big depth and detail, but Anything else that maybe you read up on today, or anything else that you want to talk about Easton Cowan? I suppose for those who didn't see yesterday's podcast, we'll just chat quickly about him. But he's a 5'11" forward, 170 pounds, had 53 points in 68 games in the regular season, but then 21 points in 20 games in the playoffs. And Dave, I was listening to the director of scouting for the Maple Leafs, Wes Clark, talking about Cowan, and he used these words to describe him: big engine, big motor, relentless, strong intelligence on and off the puck. And he noted how Cowan started the year with limited minutes and saw progression through the season, where he elevated in the playoffs, worked his way up to the top line for London through the playoffs. So that's really that was a good sign, and they like to see that. And again, we've heard from multiple scouts and draft hockey analysts and prospect analysts that he was one of the best players on the London Knights by the end of the season in the OHL final. So they decided to, what some believe, go off the board to get a project pick, someone who showed some late flash, but certainly still a prospect that has a little bit of developing to do still at his frame. And even Wes Clark came out and said he acknowledged that he's got a long way to go, not to expect him with the Leafs anytime soon, and pretty much said, yes, he's a project pick, but we still think we got a good one down the line.
Yeah, I think they really value what he did in the playoffs. They like his competitiveness. Like, I watched a lot of like the highlights that have been out there on Easton Cowan, and you're seeing a player that he's always driving play forward, right? That's something that he has a good pace to him. He's got actually decent playmaking skills too. He's always looking for those those high scoring plays. So there are things that he's going to have to develop and work on, but you're not going to find a better situation for him to do that than with the London Knights. And yeah, that playoff run he had, I'm sure the Leafs definitely appreciated the steps he took and how much improvement he showed over the year, rather than focusing solely on what he did before then. So it's all about seeing how much more he can move forward at this point.
Yeah, and that's the name of the game for a lot of these draft picks that the Maple Leafs like to get. Wes Clark did come out and stress that they do typically and often like to take players who develop over the year, and they take a lot of stock into the playoffs. And all three of the players that they selected at this draft all had strong playoff performances. So it's you kind of know where the Maple Leafs are leaning, and it makes sense, right? The Leafs, they want guys who compete and play their best hockey in the postseason. I mean, that's where they've lacked for a long time. So if they could draft guys who do that, maybe eventually that'll be different with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that's Easton Cowan, the first pick, who they took 28th overall. Centerman for the London Knights, and he'll return to London next year and be a big part of that program with the Hunters. And that was something else that I kind of saw floating around the Twitter sphere, saying, hey, look, if the Hunters are giving Easton Cowan big minutes and they rely on him and they think that he can live up to it, it's you got to earn those minutes in that organization. He certainly did, and got himself all the way up to the top line, and was someone who was defending leads late in games. And those are all really good things about a young prospect like Easton Cowan. But we'll see what happens. It's not about when you get picked. Now it's all about development and how does he develop, right? Plenty of first round busts, but also plenty of day two guys who churn out some Hall of Fame careers. So at this point, he's drafted. Now it's up to him to put in the work and become the best player he can for the Maple Leafs. As for the other two players that Toronto selected on day two, why don't we take a quick break? We'll come back and then we'll detail Hudson Malinowski and Noah Chadwick and tell you all about those two guys who the Leafs add to their prospect pipeline. But before we get into that, Dave, have a word from one of our show sponsors today.
Yep, today's show is brought to you by Athletic Greens. It is a product that I use every day, and mainly that's because it's hard to find that all-in-one supplement for get yourself that healthy nutritional insurance every day. And if you want to eat healthy and eat well, it's easier said than done. But that's no longer the case with AG1 because with one delicious scoop of AG1 and a glass of water each day, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source, superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help start your day off right. The special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, nervous system, immune system, recovery, energy, focus, and aging, all of those things. It can be hard and expensive to keep track of multiple supplements and vitamins, not to mention how hard it can be on your stomach. AG1 costs you less than $3 a day, and you're investing in your health, and it's cold and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. And AG1 has got some great offers for you. And if you're looking for that comprehensive solution to your supplemental routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Check it out to get the ultimate daily nutritional insurance.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with my co-host Dave Morassutti. If you're new to the show, it's your first time checking us out, we appreciate it. Hopefully you're enjoying the content that we're giving to you guys, and just know that this is a daily Maple Leaf centric podcast, so you can find it wherever you find your audio podcasts from. Also up on YouTube, we got new pods coming out each and every day. So if you want to know what's going on with the Maple Leafs on a day-to-day basis, make sure you're locked into the Locked On Leafs podcast. And speaking of day-to-day, day 2 saw the Leafs add 2 more prospects to their pipeline. The first one was in the 5th round at 153rd overall. Hudson Malinowski, a centerman from the AJHL Brooks Bandits. 6'1", 175-pound frame. He was an overager, born in 2004, so it was his second go-round in the NHL draft. Was passed up last year, and then ends up landing with the Maple Leafs in the 5th round this year. Dave, he's described as a good skater with a hard shot and above-average puck handling skills, but scouts say he needs to work on his defensive game. But he did have a growth spurt this past year, and the thought process is potentially he can grow into that projectable frame, and that can kind of help him with his size, could help him with his defensive game. And he's going to the NCAA this year in Providence College, where they should be able to help him with that as well and play against some men. So, another kid who, again, whether it's coming up big in the playoffs, in which he did, I'll note that in a sec, but also looking at size, right? Someone who can play maybe 2 ways in a little bit. But with the Brooks Bandits, they won the Centennial Cup tournament. He ended up 3rd in goals and 2nd in points, and scored 2 goals in the championship game at that tournament as well. So when we talk about playoff performers, Hudson Malinowski also was a playoff performer. Your thoughts on this pick, Dave?
Well, I read an interesting story about him too, that he might not have ever been able to play hockey again because he actually was shoveling snow off the roof.
Yeah.
Which what you usually do over out in Saskatchewan, and he actually fell. It was a 12-foot fall. He thought he had a concussion, but it was actually like some I can't even say that it
torn vertebral artery.
Yeah, in his neck. So basically, there was interference with blood flow to the brain. He had a surgery that was never done before at this hospital. Like, yeah, it's something you definitely want to hear when you're having a surgery like that. But he was able to recover. He was able to get himself back to playing hockey. And yeah, this is someone that, the Leafs were really, really happy to get. I know that some people were questioning, again, a guy who's coming out of the AJHL. You don't hear like a lot of those picks. But I think he's someone that, again, is going to a really good situation in Providence. He's going to have a lot of time to develop. He's going to have, again, you mentioned adding weight and things like that. Those NCAA facilities will, and what they have to offer kids there. It's important for that. And I'm sure that also might have factored into the decision for the Leafs to draft him as well. So Wes Clark said they were really happy to get him. The scouting staff really put forward that they really want to get him. So let's see. Hopefully, again, this is another player that you got to start eventually finding these 5th and 6th round guys that could potentially play games for you down the road. So Another guy we'll be definitely keeping an eye on in the NCAA for the years to come.
Yeah, for sure, and I think it's big that he's going to the NCAA. It'll give him, it'll give the Maple Leafs a better understanding about where he is at as a hockey player. The competition between the AJHL and the NCAA is much higher, so he'll get a chance to see how he is against a better talent, essentially, for lack of a better word, and see how it translates with higher level of competition. So. Yeah, that'll definitely be a player to be watching over the next little bit. I saw someone say that he projects to be a more of a bottom six NHLer, maybe a guy who transitions to the wing at some point in his career. But overall, yeah, went through a lot of adversity. Like, that story was insane. I read the same thing, and I think he was like 13 years old at the time when it happened, and it took him 7 months before he was even able to get back on his skates. And that 7 months at 13 years old playing bantam hockey, those are key years of development when you're being scouted at a young age. And, when you first look at the Elite Prospects page or the Hockey DB page, and you see that he was playing, in junior B hockey a year ago, you kind of said, what's that all about? And then you kind of read the story, and he was just a late bloomer because he lost all that development and he wasn't scouted heavily as a kid. And then he decided to stick around one extra year, also in that league before going to the Brooks Bandits. Which, if you guys are unfamiliar with the AJHL, which is the Alberta Junior Hockey League, the Brooks Bandits are, one of the best teams in that league, and they have been for many, many years. They're like the London Knights of the AJHL. So he clearly went to a good squad, and they know how to breed talent. A lot of NHLers have come from the Brooks Bandits. Was Cale Makar Brooks? Was he from the Brooks Bandits? I can't remember if it was Cale Makar or not, but he did play in the AJHL. He was drafted out of the AJHL. Cale Makar was, if I recall.
It was the Brooks Bandits. You are right.
Yeah, so Cale Makar also from the Brooks Bandits organization, right? So, they know how to develop players over there. And not to say that, Hudson's going to be as good at an NHL star as Cale Makar, obviously. But, potentially he becomes an NHLer and at some point is a good depth piece for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So just a really good story, though, a feel-good story. I'm sure a year ago when he got passed up, he's thinking to himself, maybe I won't ever get drafted into the NHL, especially after all the adversity that he had to overcome with the procedure that he had during his fall. Didn't go to the WHL, took a different path to get where he's at, but heard his name, and he was in the building today, and a lot of friends and family were there. And, so it's really cool that he was there and was excited to be a Toronto Maple Leaf. He grew up a Leafs fan, actually, and grew up a Crosby and a Austin Matthews fan. Says he styles his game and his shot after Austin Matthews, and also noted that Matty Beniers is a player that he likes to watch as well. So, if he can blend some Matthews offensive game with some Matty Beniers defensive game or a Crosby defensive game, you might have a decent player here in Hudson Malinowski. So we'll see what ends up happening with him, but he's off now to the NCAA after being with the Brooks Bandits. He'll be with Providence College. So if you want to keep up to date with this kid, you're going to have to watch him at Providence College next season. Next up in the 6th round, the Maple Leafs made the selection at 185th overall. It was left shot defenseman Noah Chadwick of the WHL Lethbridge Hurricanes. Big guy, Dave. Big dude, 6'4", 187 pounds as an 18-year-old from Saskatoon. So he just sounds like a farm boy. I don't know if he was a farm boy or not, but he just sounds like he grew up on a farm in Saskatoon, and he just legitimately moved hay bales as a kid for a living and played hockey as his side gig. And now all of a sudden he's going off the farm and going to be doing some things with Lethbridge and hopefully with the Maple Leafs. I did see Wes Clark describe Noah Chadwick as he's long and moves the puck. Another upside guy that checks a lot of boxes for us is what he had to say about Chadwick. Had 20 points in 67 games this season for the Lethbridge Hurricanes. But despite the low point totals, Dave, scouts say that Noah Chadwick displays good offensive instincts, often looking for sticks in the slot. I saw a statistic out there that he had a really high slot passes per 60 metric, and also has strong intuition in the transition game with a high exit rate. Also ranked highly in entry prevention with strong gap control, defending the rush. So we'll see if Noah Chadwick can turn out to be a NHL defenseman at some point. So it's tough when you get down to these later selections, 5th, 6th, 7th round, but it's certainly not impossible. But it's going to be a long, long way, and there's a lot of development that Noah Chadwick will have to do before putting on the blue and white.
Yeah, and a lot of people are saying that what's kind of holding him back, it's not his size. He's got, there's good tools there. He just needs to work on his skating, skating and his stick handling. So this is obviously another guy who they're hoping, maybe slip through the cracks a little bit here, has some things that you can really, bank on to really help develop and push him forward. So I think the fact that he's also good off the rush, that's something the Leafs really wanted. Really good, in those regards. So I think, again, the size is actually interesting because, we don't see the Leafs drafting for size, and it seemed like a lot of teams were doing that. Like, if I was like reading a lot of like what the analysts were saying, the Calgary Flames went for size over skill and things like that.
I think it was the Coyotes didn't draft a single player under 6 feet today in the last 2 days. Not one player was under 6 foot.
Yeah, so it's interesting because GMs don't like to say they like to copy what other teams do, but it's also clear that when you see what Vegas did, there's teams banking more on what size can do for players rather than in some ways the skill that the players possess, which I don't know. I prefer to go with guys who might have that skill and you can kind of use that to your advantage. But that's not Noah Chadwick, though. He's not just a big defensive defenseman. There is upside there. So we'll just see if he can continue to push that forward.
Yeah, good upside swing in the 6th round, right? You get a toolsy guy who's got good, good length, good size, and then has some instincts offensively. If skating is kind of the one thing that's holding him back, guess what the Maple Leafs have? A really good skating development team led by Barb Underhill, who's done wonders with a lot of players. So if she can get her hands on Chadwick in rookie camps and eventually when this guy gets to the Marlies for a couple of years, maybe he can learn how to skate better. And all of a sudden now you got more of a dynamic player in Noah Chadwick. It's no guarantees he gets to the NHL, obviously, when you're picked low like that, but there's a chance, there's a possibility that it could happen. Like I saw, he was ranked as high as the 117th player in the draft by Daily Faceoff. He ended up going 185, so a little bit of value. I think I saw Scott Wheeler, though, when he was putting out his analysis on every team. He said the Maple Leafs were given like a C grade, maybe it was, and was considered one of the losers of the draft, and projected Chadwick as more than likely, like a top AHL defenseman than a depth NHL defender. But we'll see what ends up happening with the kid. But that's the draft class for the Maple Leafs here in 2023. You got Easton Cowan, you've got Hudson Malinowski, and you've got Noah Chadwick, defenseman. So we'll see what these kids can do in 4 or 5 years when we can properly actually evaluate them. Because we could say whatever we want today, but ultimately it's on them from here on out. If they can develop into some capable NHLers, good on them. It's going to be all about their development from here on out. No one remembers that Jamie Benn was a 5th round pick, that Goudreau was a 4th round pick. Braden Point was a 3rd round pick. No one cares, because guess what? They turned out to be stars in the NHL. The draft selections don't matter anymore, and that's the case for these kids as well. It matters on draft day, but then after that, it's It's all about, all right, what can you do now? You're in the organization. You have all the same tools as everybody else. What can you do for us now? So we'll see. A few years how this draft class pans out for the Maple Leafs and what is technically sort of Brad Treliving's first draft class, sort of. Although I believe that this Noah Chadwick character, he kind of seems like Treliving may have had a say in this one. No, from Lethbridge, Alberta.
Yeah, I would say that there must have been some. Like I don't think Brad Treliving is just like sitting back saying, "All right, guys, do your thing." I think he's gonna have an input or two on the guys that were taken, and I'm sure the Leafs. They had him on. There's probably some similarities between their board and Calgary's board, and he's saying, "Well, yeah, I saw this guy, thought he's pretty good. You guys on board? What do you think?" And that usually how those things turn out in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of Brad Treliving, he spoke after the draft as well. So we'll touch on some of the highlights from that press conference and get to some of the news and notes ahead of free agency. Quick turnaround. Quick turnaround. You've got 1 day to gather yourself as an organization before you get going with the free agent frenzy, which starts tomorrow at noon. So, yeah, really, really quick turnaround. So we'll come back, chat about what Treliving had to say and get to some of the news and notes ahead free agency 24 hours out. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with my co-host Dave Morassutti. The draft in the rearview mirror. It's over. It's done. And now we move forward to free agency, which begins tomorrow, Dave. Tomorrow is when free agency is. It's insane that these general managers and these teams and organizations have only 1 day to not only travel back from Nashville, which I don't know if you're seeing what's going on over there, but apparently there's just some like crazy weather patterns that have been going on. The smoke and like there's delays everywhere. There's a lot of stuff going on, yet it doesn't matter. Free agent frenzy still kicks off July 1 at noon. And there's some interesting things that was said today from Brad Treliving in regards to some of the current pending UFAs that the Maple Leafs had. Maybe there's some rumblings of some players that he could be targeting for the Maple Leafs on July 1 when free agency kicks off. So we'll kind of go through those names right now. So we'll start off with what he was talking about in his press conference and talking about the pending Leafs UFAs. Spoke and said, quote, "We like the players, but we haven't found a number that works." That's kind of in response to everyone but Kampf, ultimately, because David Kampf is the only pending UFA that they were able to sign to a contract, in which Brad Treliving was asked about it, and he said that he felt that Kampf's deal was at a manageable number at $2.4 million and is very well liked by the staff, and he liked him as well when he got to know Kampf and understand, kind of what he's all about. Sheldon Keefe also spoke on David Kampf and said he's a guy who can play 3C, 4C. He can take on big, important minutes. He does a lot of good things for us. So is there more free agents that the Maple Leafs have that they're going to be able to get done? Dave, what do you think? Do you think we get any more of these pending UFAs locked into contracts before they become free agents at noon on July 1st?
I was kind of hoping they would figure out the like maybe if they can get Luke Shen back, but Brad Treliving did make it seem like prices to get players right now signed seem to be higher than normal. They felt comfortable with the Kampf deal, so they went with that one. I'm sure maybe the other ones like Shen, O'Reilly, Achari, like those are kind of the three I was looking at. He's probably seeing the prices for them being a little bit higher. And usually what happens is if, the Leafs put an offer and the player has a number in mind, they got in free agency and they say, "I'm not really getting that number." And they kind of circle back. It does happen, but yeah, I'm sure that between, the 1 day that the Leafs have, they're going to try to make that push again for those, for those three guys. I would say maybe more so Shen and O'Reilly based on what we've heard, the last week. if we don't see anything tomorrow, I'm not really optimistic that they're going to come back, because as soon as the open market's out there and teams who have a lot more cap space to play with are probably going to make offers that they can't. No, those players will likely want to take.
And just a reminder, the current pending UFAs that the Maple Leafs have are Noel Acciari, Zach Aston-Reese, Michael Bunting, Alex Kerfoot, Ryan O'Reilly, Wayne Simmons, Eric Gustafson, Justin Hall, and Luke Shen. Those guys technically Redeem Zahorna also is a pending UFA, as is Jordy Ben. Eric Shalgren, actually, a G6 UFA. So Eric Shalgren could be out the door as well. We'll see. They've got a lot of goaltenders, so I wouldn't be shocked if that is the case. And then a couple of guys they have as restricted free agents: Matt Hollowell, Philip Kral, SDA, which we'll see what happens there. Nick Abruzzese is an RFA, along with Victor Mete, Elias, and Ilya Samsonov. So those are all of the guys in need of contracts. Whether they get one or not, those are the players that are not currently with a contract for next season with the Toronto Maple Leafs. But yes, as you mentioned, it appears that talks are still ongoing with Luke Shen and Ryan O'Reilly in particular. It appears that everybody else that I just mentioned, the UFAs at the very least, will probably end up going to free agency, and we might not see them back. I think Kerfoot, actually, it sounds like Kerfoot, they're also still kind of in communicado with his agent. We'll see where that ends up going. But yeah, I know, Dave. I know. But hey, he's the Swiss Army knife. They love him. Sheldon loves this guy. He does. Any
You mean
chance
like a rusted Swiss Army knife that just is not useful anymore?
Dude, I wish he was rusty. At least if he was rusty, it probably would, be a grinder. But dude, anytime Keefe has a chance to shake things up, the first move he does is typically move Kerfoot up to the top 6. So I wouldn't be surprised. If he's a cheap, I don't even know. I don't know. We'll see what ends up happening with Kerfoot.
I just think you got to go different. You just got to go with something different, because
Yeah.
like someone yes, he did score that one overtime goal, but then what else was there really? I think he had a goal against Florida.
He's a good penalty killer. Like he is a good penalty killer, so that certainly helps. But yeah, you probably do want to go in a bit of a different direction. And speaking of different direction, this is where other reports are starting to surface on where the Leafs might be leaning in terms of their free agent priorities. A couple of outlets now out there talking about the Maple Leafs and what they could do on July 1st. And two names popped up: Ryan Reaves and Austin Watson. What's your take on either of those two being declared priorities for the Maple Leafs come July 1?
I mean, I know a lot of Leafs fans who have wanted to see the Leafs get Ryan Reaves. I remember when I think he was traded from New York to Minnesota.
Yeah.
And people were just like, why didn't the Leafs do that? Why didn't the Leafs do that? I'm like, well, Ryan Reaves had a pretty expensive contract.
Yeah, like $2.5 million.
Yeah, like he's not a $2.5 million player. Like he's, I will say this: unlike some of these fourth liners out there, he can still somewhat be useful.
No, Dave.
Honestly,
I don't think so.
I'm not gonna pay the guy if you're gonna get, if you rather have him over Wayne Simmons if they're trying to get that type of player.
Yes, right? But I also don't want Wayne Simmons.
No, I don't want Wayne Simmons. I don't want Austin Watson either. I don't know what he would provide. Like,
we're talking about a guy who had 5 goals this year in how many games? 73? 5 goals in 73 games this year, 5 goals in 69 games last year, 1 goal the year before that. He's never scored double-digit goals, actually. His highest is 9. His second year in Vegas, 9 goals, 20 points with the Vegas Golden Knights in that would have been their second year. I want to say of as a franchise. Had 74 PIMs that year as well. Wait, he only had 31 penalty minutes in 61 games with the Wild this year. Did he not get into as many fights as I remember?
That probably had to have been it because, like, I know fighting has gone down and you have to have willing combatants, but I wouldn't expect it to be that much of a decline.
But that's what Ryan Reaves is really supposed to do. Is he's kind of a sheriff out there who, hey, you mess with my guy, I'm gonna drop you like a sack of potatoes. Like that's the only reason why you bring Ryan Reaves in. He becomes the boogeyman that Wayne Simmons was a couple of years ago. That's just kind of what he is. He's a fighter. That's it. He's not going to provide you much offense, but he will maybe potentially. The thought process is, be a bit of a peacekeeper out there where guys can't take liberties on Austin Matthews or liberties on Matthew Nyes like we saw Sam Bennett do in the playoffs. And if there is, then there'll be hell to pay. You'll have to answer to Ryan Reaves. And if that's something that you think is worth having in the lineup on a nightly basis, okay, sure. But I don't think it should be much more than $1 million contract. Like
No,
if
not
you
at
get
all.
anything more than that, to me, it's an overpayment and not something that I'd really want to be a part of, to be quite honest with you.
I mean, I'd rather have size and someone that has more scoring ability to him. Like that would be a better use of the cap space. But yeah, no, there's no way I would be entertaining Ryan Reaves at anything. Like if that number starts with 1, I'm already gonna be pissed. like I'm not
Right,
saying you go
yeah, like 950, 800K maybe, like something in that realm. Like, sure, of course, sign a guy to a league minimum contract that can be buried if you feel like he just doesn't have the legs anymore to play. Like he's not a young dude either. He's 36 years old now. Like,
yeah.
he's I don't know.
He's not a needle mover in any way. Like I'm not like I don't hate that what they're trying to do in terms of adding physicality, but at the same time I feel like there's other guys if you want to go that route that I would like to see the least. I mean,
well, physicality like that. This is why Vegas wins. They added guys who have physicality, right? Ivan Barbashev, very physical player. You saw that guy. He was a piss missile out there hitting everything that moved, right? You saw defensively, they had guys like Nick Hag who was out there and he was hitting things that moved. But guess what? They can also do skate and play hockey, and they're pretty good at it. So just dudes who are just out there who are just intimidating to me. Call me new school, I suppose, but I don't think that's a way to build a winning brand of hockey. Like, yes, Vegas, they were big and they were tough to play against, but those guys could also play hockey and score, and that is the name of the game at the end of the day. That's kind of my reasoning, I suppose, for not being as enthusiastic on Ryan Reaves. Like, yeah, he's big, and I know they want to add size, but I would like you to add guys with size who also have skill, if you know what I mean.
Like to me, I would rather go after a guy like I would rather bring back a Nola Chari if you want to bring guys who are physical,
Right.
can also score. I would like the Leafs to consider trying to go out and trade for like a Lawson Krause, someone who's big, physical, and can also play hockey, as you say.
What about Garnett Hathaway? Like a cheaper version.
Yeah, I mean he can score. He's we know he can be nasty. Probably a guy the Bruins would want to have back if I'm not like
Probably, but like as of right now, this moment, he is a pending UFA, just someone who I tossed out there who's, could still play the game a little bit, has some scoring touch, and who you can rely on to play 82 games. But, we'll see what ends up happening there. But obviously, if those two names are being brought up, we didn't even talk about Austin Watson, but he's pretty much in the same mold as a Ryan Reaves. If those two guys are being brought up, clearly there's an MO there for Toronto to get bigger. That's for sure. Anything else stick out to you from what Brad Treliving had to say, and maybe some breadcrumbs that you've read or that you've heard about what the Leafs might be doing in the next couple of days here?
Well, I think he brought up the reality of the fact that in the last few years the cap has only gone up $2 million, and that's really made things tough for general managers. I mean, look, you're seeing players just being thrown away for nothing. Thank you, Gary. You're just like demeaning a lot of players where they're just cap dumps because teams want to get better, and the only way they can do that is to trade guys who, yes, like a Josh Bailey, not a $5 million player anymore. So like I can get that, but it's you want movement. You want to see teams try to make trades and try to do things, to make their teams better. And it's like, yeah, no, we can't. Gary says we only can spend this much, and that to me is it's teams gonna have to get really creative to do moves, and we're gonna see players potentially getting traded for less than what you'd expect because there's only so many teams that will be able to pull off the deals that are necessary because of the cap space. So I think that's just the sense I got. He's making it seem like it's not out of the ordinary to expect these type of deals to happen. So I just hope the Leafs can find a way to make some moves because I still think the trade route could potentially be the best route to make those significant improvements that they need to make.
Yeah, agreed. And one of those trade chips could end up being William Nylander. Sounds as though they're not particularly close on a contract extension. I was reading that Willie is more so in the $9.5 to $10.5 million range for an annual average value, and Toronto really trying to keep it under $9 million. So we know that modified no trade clause kicks in on July 1st, and like that's not a big deterrent. No, because regardless, whoever you're trading him to, you're probably going to try and work out a sign and trade anyways, so you could get the package that you deserve for moving on from a guy like Nylander. So you're not going to trade him to Arizona for whatever. You're going to trade him to a team that he wants to go to, sign an extension already, and then you end up getting whatever haul that you agreed to come back the other way. So I don't look at that July 1. I don't look at that modified no trade that kicks in as really him gaining much leverage. I think the leverage is already there, to be honest with you, even pre-July 1. It's definitely there. But if Brad Treliving feels that gap can't be closed and there's still going to be, million plus gap between them, potentially Nylander does find himself in a different city, different zip code. And that's the way that they create cap space and maybe make those changes on the blue line to, reshape this core and reshape the way that this team is built. That's one possibility. Lastly, also, there was discussion today as well. I'm going to send you this tweet here too if you want to bring it up. It's the tweet that I had earlier today. But the one other thing that was brought up, so the buyout window is it ends today actually, and Brad Treliving came out and said he's not expected to use a buyout tomorrow, and obviously everybody was wondering on Matt Murray if that was going to be a scenario in which they buy him out. But he did note that there is a second buyout window that could potentially factor in here. If you could just scroll down to the buyout period here. So buyouts can start on the later of June 15 or 48 hours after the playoffs end, and the buyout period ends on June 30th at 5 p.m. Eastern. Teams, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, teams may receive an additional buyout window. If a team has a player go to arbitration and it is either settled or awarded, the team receives a new 48-hour buyout window beginning 3 days after the arbitration settlement or award. The only contracts that are eligible to be bought out, however, in this window are for players with cap hits greater than $4 million, and they were on the team's roster at the last trade deadline. So, Matt Murray checks those boxes in terms of being a $4+ million player and was on the Maple Leafs roster at the trade deadline. Now, in order to get that second buyout window, they do have to take a player to arbitration. They have 3 ARB eligible RFAs right now.
Yeah.
Ilya Samsonov, Victor Mete, and Matt Hollowell.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that they take Samsonov to arbitration. And maybe they settle because typically this stuff does get settled beforehand anyway. But I believe all they need is the date to be set. I don't think they actually have to go through arbitration. It just has to, the process has to have been started because it
Yeah,
said settled, right?
it's either settled or awarded. So
Right.
basically, they settle if they basically elect for arbitration, but they settle before the arbitration date, then the 48-hour window begins.
Right. And that's what I think is probably what will end up happening here. Where if you are the Maple Leafs, do you really want to buy out Matt Murray, um, and then not be able to bring back Ilya Samsonov, and now all of a sudden you're sitting there with Joseph Wall and nobody, and it's now middle of August, and so why make that move so hastily when that's still going to be an option down the road potentially for this team. So I could see that being the case where that happens, and essentially they say to themselves, "Well, we could kick this, we can kick this down the road a little bit. Maybe we can see if we can try and find a trade partner. Maybe somebody does end up wake up one day and say, you know what? Let me trade for Matt Murray. We know somebody did a year ago. So maybe somebody else will try and do that again. Maybe the same person could spring for a Matt Murray at some point if they want to do that. But there's still a chance if the buyout window comes and goes and Matt Murray is not bought out that he could be later on this summer. And I would imagine that's how things end up playing out because I don't think there's a possibility that Matt Murray could return to the Maple Leafs next year. I don't see how they could possibly do that. Murray, Samsonov, just one of those two have to be gone, and I'd probably rather keep Samsonov. Like 100% would rather keep Samsonov.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be releasing or not releasing. You don't want to have to move Samsung because you know what he can do. He's the least can be available for you. I said, and I was hearing Frank Sarvalli also saying like if the Leafs don't buy him out or trade him, then LTIR is the next
Okay,
thing.
here's the thing with that though, Dave. Like Matt Murray was healthy in the playoffs last year. He was the team's backup goaltender when Samsonov got hurt, right? He was the team's third goalie up in the press box. Joe Wall was number 2. And then when Joe Wall became the 1, Samsonov got hurt. Matt Murray was cleared and good to go, and he sat on the bench, and he was the backup. He was healthy. Why all of a sudden do people think that he's just going to wake up and land on LTIR and be there for the whole season?
Well, we've seen it. Guys are healthy, and then something happens in the offseason where they get a procedure done or something
But I
like that.
don't believe that's the. But can't if you're the Maple Leafs and you don't go through the buyout and you're just sitting there with your fingers absolutely crossed, thinking, Murray, please get hurt. Murray, please get
No,
hurt.
I don't
Murray,
think that they're not going to do that. Like, look,
that's what I mean. Like the guy is healthy right now. So one of two things, okay, have to happen for Murray to end up on LTIR. Either they're going to game the system and basically say, hey, look, we'll give you your money, just leave quietly. We'll Robida Island you, and you don't have to worry about playing for the year, right? But what if he doesn't agree to that? And he said, no, I want to play. Like, I'm still a young guy. I still want to play. Now, all of a sudden, you still have that nearly $5 million cap hit on your books. You've got Ilya Samsonov on your books, and you've got Joseph Wall, who also cannot go down, will probably get claimed off waivers if they try to send him down. So they'd have to try and carry 3 goalies. Like, it's just such a risky scenario for me to just assume, unless there is a wink, wink, nudge, nudge situation, which it's not out of the realm of possibility. Again, we've seen it before, but it's just, man, it would be a gamble just to say, oh, he'll get hurt and end up on LTIR at some point anyway. But what if he doesn't? Now you got to play the guy. Like that's all I'm saying. When I hear the Murray LTIR situation, yeah, that clearly is most beneficial for the Maple Leafs in their cap situation. But I don't think you can guarantee that this guy will end up on LTIR when he was healthy to end the year. And at this point, you're just either praying that he does get hurt or he just accepts the fact that he is not wanted by Toronto and just says, fine, LTIR me, and I won't play for the year. That's ultimately what that means, right?
Well, I mean, I just think that you've seen teams like, look, Nikita Kucherov had that mysterious hip injury that he had surgery on and missed the whole year and came back for the playoffs, and Tampa's cap problems were all of a sudden solved. I'm not saying this is like, totally like that, but it could be a situation like that. I just think the Leafs are going to they're not going to rush into buying him out. I mean, obviously they didn't rush into buying him out now because they don't see that as the option right now. Because if it was, they would have bought him out already.
Right.
I don't know if even if that second buyout window opens, I don't think they're going to do it. They would have done it in the first one. What's changed between now? Like, what would change
Well,
between now and
what
when the second
well,
one opens?
what I'd say is what changes is they have more time to try and find a better solution. Is what changes, right? Like they didn't have to make the decision today because in their minds there's going to be another opportunity in the second buyout window. If they don't have a better option by then you buy them out. But if you find somebody at, like, let's say, you know, somebody is willing to take on Matt Murray's deal and it only costs a third round pick, you 100% do that. They weren't willing to take a third round pick yesterday, but let's say, they wake up on July 18th and they're willing to accept the third round pick to take on Matt Murray's contract. You make that trade 100%. So all this is, I think, is you're waiting for a better option to pop up at some point and for someone to roll the dice on Matt Murray in the same way that Kyle Dubas did last year, that Buffalo was trying to do also, until Murray said, nah, I don't want to go there, and he nixed that trade. But there were a couple of teams that were interested in bringing him in. Maybe there still will be at some point. Maybe an injury occurs somewhere. I don't know. But to me, I think this buyout is probably plan B. Plan A would be a reasonable trade, where if you only have to give up a pick or a mid-level prospect. But if it, the buyout window comes, the second buyout window comes, and they haven't been able to trade him because the demand to bring on his contract is stupid high still, like a first or a top-end talent, then ultimately plan B, all right, we'll just buy him out instead. Like, that's what I think is going to happen here.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we will. We will. We certainly will. Are we gonna do a bonus free agent frenzy tomorrow or what? We haven't even talked about, like, we're talking about how teams are unable to regroup.
I ain't doing one if Ryan Reaves is their big signing on free agent frenzy day. I'll tell you that much.
I'm saying, but like beforehand, we might have to do a bonus show for Saturday. We might have to do it. It's a quick turnaround, man. It's insane to me that there's only 24 hours between the end of the draft and the beginning of free agency. I guess like just under 48 technically, but
well, this is a late time for the draft. Is usually a week earlier.
Yeah, 100%. And now it's like, all right, you have 1 day to collect yourselves, and then boom, we're right back at it. It's gonna be wild. And even Treliving was saying that might mean that free agency could kind of leak into July a little bit longer than typical. He made the joke. He's like, yeah, July 1, you do all the work, and then by July 2, you're out fishing. And said probably not going to be the case this year. He thinks that there's going to be a lot of, signings that will kind of go into the first week or two of July, and some bigger names as well, which we kind of saw up in last year too. Remember, what was Nazem Kadri went pretty long into free agency before he signed and circled back on Calgary. So yeah, I could totally see that being the case here again this season. All right, buddy. Probably do another show just to kind of preview the free agent frenzy, what we want the Leafs to do in free agency, and we'll see what happens this weekend. Should be a fun one. But let's that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcast platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Leave a like, a comment on this video if you're watching on YouTube. And we're back with another episode for y'all tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.